We were just talking to a potential client about what SSOE can do. Brian and I were filling him in on it. They're more interested in their process of manufacturing, but they need somebody to help them with the building. And so we were describing that we're a multidisciplinary firm, that we can start with civil and help them all the way through the process of permitting and construction. And we were talking about our illustrious project manager and where we were located. Their project is in Texas. It's a good dialogue, so we informed them of the kind of things to be looking for. They've gotten down to one site, so we probably won't be helping them with the site selection, but we'll be doing a little bit more of the actual building and the building design around their process. That's it in a nutshell.
So we're here for the next few minutes to talk about ways to expedite project schedule, particularly from the design side.
We hog tie them and throw them to the ground. So seriously, we've been in this project for 2 years and they're still revising their process. We would love to have their process layout. We would love to have their complete chemical list. We would love to have the actual tool layout, and it never happens. And so it evolves as we go through. So what we do is, talking about expediting the schedule, is we release several packages. So we literally are placing mill order for steel before the design is even done. So when you look at a building that's like 3/4 of a mile long, you have to have expansion joints about every 400 feet. And so we look at those as individual buildings. So we can issue the steel for that. And what we try and do is just fit it under a specific construction type. So if we have to apply fireproofing, in the case of Ford, we're looking at intumescent paint so that they can get those things coated at the factory and it doesn't slow down the process. But we're looking at long lead items. We're learning things like humidifiers and HVAC units because there's so many projects going up. Most of the manufacturers are limiting the maximum size that they're willing to build, that they won't build a custom size. And so we have to know that information. That's why we look at having a contractor as a partner and having some of our trade partners as design partners so that we can understand what the market is. It's been changing over the last 2 years. During the pandemic, we had to place orders for the fabric for the roofing material 12 months in advance. We're doing the same thing with Kingspan. Now, a lot of that, as you know, has changed a little bit, but we may get back to that point. So those are some ways that we're trying to expedite the package. Just look at early design things, look at what the parameters are for what's available on the market, and releasing early packages. So we look at doing some rough grading, we look at utilities. And the problem is you've got to fix a lot of that. And to your point, we often have electrical loads that are overstated and process loads that are understated. And so we work with the client. It's still going to be revisions, but it's just like what we were doing in the chip manufacturing industry. Change is a constant thing, and you just have to deal with it. Anybody that thinks we're going to get all the answers at the beginning is naive.
Yeah. Well,
didn't mean to throw you under the bus.
Yeah. No. And
oh, it'd be grand.
And one of the biggest things to do is to work with the clients and help them understand we don't have to have 100% of the information, but there is some information that will move us forward. And so if we can get 70% there, then that's probably okay, and we can continue to refine as we go. But especially if you're talking about a greenfield facility, there's a lot of site work that's got to be done before you ever get there. There's outside stakeholders and utilities and all of that has to be worked out. So you can let the small details simmer and they can continue to change as long as you get the big things up front that allow you to set the infrastructure in place.
I think one of the other things that we try and do with our general contractor is we always advise to our clients to bring everybody in and get the whole team of professionals, is this risk management. You know, if you give us this much information, we have to make assumptions about it. And here's the associated risk and the potential cost with that. And they don't like to hear that up front, but it's something that we try and sell to them pretty hard because you have to assign a risk to it. If you don't know what your affluent is and going to the, the sanitary sewer in your local municipality, you may have to pay for that. And so the sooner that you can define that and we can make an agreement with the local municipality that they actually can do that. We're working on a project where we have nanotubes as part of the discharge. And while they had agreed to processing that, they're now treating it as though it's asbestos, and that's going to be very expensive. So that's a risk. We identified that early, but we do have an agreement that we're going to have to go back and kind of pig-headedly work with the AJ to make that work. But that's probably the biggest thing, that with our whole team, we can decide realistic risk values. That's probably the most important thing that our clients don't always hear, but we try. It's usually steel. That's why we place, yeah, it's because there's so many big projects being out there. There's so many steel fabricators that are within an area that they can ship. Arizona happens to be lucky, and they've got half a dozen of them. But it's usually the steel that's the big deal. That's why we were talking about how to expedite the schedule. We're breaking the building up into separate pieces and we're releasing mill orders. A mill order, when it comes back, will also define what shapes are available for our schedule, and then we can adjust our design around those. So that's the big one. Used to be roofing products was a big one. Insulation was part of it. Some of the equipment that I was talking about, the HVAC, the long leads for that can be a killer. The power stations, when we do a substation, the transformers are so big, you literally have to order those things almost 2 years in advance. And I don't know what the lead time on those are now, but that's one of the big ones that we go for. Even Kingspan, we're using a insulated metal panel on most of these projects. That becomes something that we actually had to do almost a mill order with them so that we could get in the queue. So those are the ones that are usually the big hitters. Sometimes it's process valving and things like that. It's bizarre what it is. Yeah. And that's why we try and bring in our contractors and our subtrades to give us up-to-date information that can inform the design. Much like I was talking about the humidifiers or dehumidifiers and the air handlers, if we know what the maximum size is that they're willing to produce, then we might need more of them. We can do the space planning for that. We can do the actual physical design of the mechanical systems.
And one of the key things about building design that we're finding becomes more critical early on, and it really has to do more with site work and concrete and things like that, especially if you have a multi-story building, is identifying your vertical transport within the building, your stairways, your elevators, your openings and penetrations and things like that, because those have to go in early, but the process continues to evolve. And so trying to fix as much of those elements when it comes to your egress, where you might be moving materials up and down, becomes something that you need to know earlier. And a lot of times those logistics conversations don't happen until later. So moving those forward into your design process, because once you fix those, you don't want to have to dig out an elevator pit and start over. So, and that's one of the first things you got to pour. So thinking about things like that, which most people think, everybody's so focused on the process itself, but you've got to figure out how to move people and materials pretty early on.
If you can believe it or not, an elevator pit where you have the sump becomes a big issue after you've poured it if you don't have it in the right location. And so Dana's point is correct, is you have to understand the process well enough so that we can put the vertical transports, whether they're freight elevators, personnel elevators, or ASRSs. You have to know where those are, and they have to be fixed early on in the process. Well, it's constant. Like we were saying, was when Carl was up on the
for that as far as
yes, but that's what I think Dana's point was, is that there's oddballs you have to fix, and the vertical transport, believe it or not, become one of those things. Right. It's like the long lead steel items or the long lead on the HVAC or even the transformers. That becomes a critical aspect because we got to pour the foundations, get the steel erected, and those. If you have to put a big hole where the pit goes, it delays the job. So we have to understand that. And generally in the process, we can start to fix them, but we have some people that want to change their minds.
Just a few. And keeping things moving. We always talk about building the sandbox, and so it's defining the shape of the sandbox, agreeing to, if it's columns versus trusses or things like that, what are the spaces that we have to work with, and try to set the rules of the road early. And you share that with the process side of, this is what you've got to fit in because this is what we've got to fit in as well, and identifying who goes where. And kind of setting those rules early on and trying to maintain those. Obviously things change, but trying to minimize that as much as possible.
And then it's back to what I was talking about earlier, is if it's going to be a change, we have to put that as a risk, and then we have to manage that and figure out what the costs are, because we can't always go out and hog out a hole in the slab and put it in. And what is that in time and schedule? It's usually not the cost, it's the time on the schedule, because everybody wants to get product out at a certain time. And so its schedule is king, not so much the cost. Although we are going through some value engineering on some of our projects. Imagine that.
Although I will say you can avoid value engineering by having all of your partners engaged very early on and as a part of that. So having conceptual estimators on board, having your key trades engaged and on board, they can help shape you down a path that where you're building in the value as you go, as opposed to trying to find value later on. So that's a key schedule element that a lot of people don't think about, is the earlier you make those key decisions, and you can make those decisions with very little information, so getting the right partners on board, having them there early and informing you the whole way, you're going to get a better outcome at the end, both schedule and budget and overall quality.
So you think value-based design is a good thing, huh?
Oh, it's fantastic.
No, well, what it does is it helps mitigate risk, because you make a decision, you live with it, and you move on. And it's always informed. So at the end, you don't end up, you know, $500,000 over your budget because you've been checking all along.
Yeah.
Now, when you finally bid the thing, does it change a little bit? Yeah, but at least we've managed it through the whole process.
Well, and transparency and openness is there the whole way, because everybody's got their books open, everybody's seeing what's behind the curtain, and when you're making those decisions, you may not even bid at that point because you've already tried to select the best as you've gone through. So, and that reduces weeks and months off the schedule there by not having to competitively bid and things like that. So.
I don't think you do. You know, I think what you do is you work towards the schedule, and then it has to be adjusted. But that's, again, it's that kind of risk management. If you don't make the decision by now, and she's pretty good at that, look, we need this information. But what we've been learning is like this vertical transport. That's, who would think? But it becomes important. And the thing is you have to tell your clients, well, you need a freight elevator, and then there's different ratings for the freight elevator. How much do you put on at one time? That's what they're having troubles with. One of our other clients, they were using passenger elevators, and they're just not designed for the load or the duty cycle. And so it's odd what becomes kind of the sticky factor. I mean, in the construction world, they use a critical path, and they shake the thing out, and they follow that. And we're trying to do that on the design side. We do a lot of pull planning. We do a lot of charrettes. Probably the thing that we've worked with Panasonic was most effective is we bring them into our own office in a great big conference room and hold everybody hostage, and we work on the whiteboards. And what we're doing is bringing in stakeholders and making decisions, key decisions, and say, no, you don't get 2 weeks, you got 3 days. Yeah. And that's probably the fastest way or the best way to manage a schedule. Is be a little bit hard-nosed. She's tougher than she looks.
Yeah, well, and sometimes you have to, you know, if we're going to help our clients move the schedule along, we have to set those hard deadlines. We have to make a choice.